China, the world's second-largest economy, is on the cusp of one of the most significant demographic transitions in its modern history. Over the past few decades, China's strict population control policies, particularly the one-child policy, dramatically reshaped family structures and birth rates. However, as birth rates have declined and life expectancy has risen, China is now facing a rapidly aging population. Here's a graph on the median age, data that was published by the UN, World Population Prospects, 2024. As you can see, China's median age has risen tremendously fast. Back in 1980, China's median age sat at just 20.9, but by 2023, this rose to over 39.1. The data even has its own projections, so let's extend the graph to showcase the projections. As you can see, the source indicates that China's median age would rise to over 54.7 by 2060. That's a huge difference from where it was once in the 1980s. Furthermore, what's even more concerning about China's rapidly rising median age is that it is catching up to some of the oldest populations out there. Let's add Japan and South Korea, which are amongst Asia's oldest populations. As you can see, China may not have a higher median age than these two countries, but it is getting there, and the projections are even showing that China would surpass both countries in the future. So, why is this a problem, you ask? Well, this shift in demographics has implications for a lot of things. But for what we are going to talk about today, it will have implications for government spending, the labour market, social welfare, national debt, savings and investment, and economic inequality. China is going to face one of its biggest ever economic problems, and if it doesn't fix this, then it might fall into an economic stagnation like the one seen in Japan. Now, before we talk about these issues, let's first dive deep into the problem. The problem, after all, extends beyond the median age. Here's another graph to depict what we mean. The graph, based on the old age dependency ratio, is about how much older individuals depend on the working age population. In simple terms, it shows how many retirees rely on each worker. As the ratio increases, fewer workers are available to support more retirees. This creates pressure on social security, healthcare systems, and public finances. As you can see, China, as of the latest year available for 2023, has an old age dependency ratio of 20.7%. What that means is that for every 100 working age individuals in China, about 21 older adults rely on them for support. Let's compare the United States to get a clearer picture of how bad it is in China. As you can see, the US has a dependency ratio of just 26.8%. While it is higher than China, what you should know is that the US is a more developed economy than that of China. This means the US has stronger social security systems, healthcare infrastructure, and a higher GDP per capita to absorb the financial pressures of an aging population. On the other hand, China, still transitioning to a fully developed economy, faces more significant challenges in managing its aging demographic. Furthermore, the US receives substantial influxes of immigrants. This helps to replenish its working-age population, offsetting some of the strain caused by an aging society. Immigrants contribute to the labour force, pay taxes, and support economic growth, which ultimately eases the burden on social security and healthcare systems. China, however, does not have the same level of immigration. Now, China's growing old age population, as we mentioned earlier, is going to become problematic. And one of the biggest reasons why that is because of government spending. China's government, like many other governments out there, has a responsibility to take care of its people. With a higher proportion of older adults, healthcare needs would naturally rise. Data from the OECD Health Expenditure and Financing Database, 2023, shows that in 2000, China's health expenditure per capita amounted to only $160. But by 2020, it has risen to over $945. Much of this cost escalation is attributed to an older population needing more frequent medical visits, long-term treatments, and specialized care. Chronic conditions, after all, are more prevalent in older demographics, and treating these conditions requires sustained healthcare funding. Here's another graph, with data from Our World in Data based on Lindt 1994, OECD 1993, OECD Stat. The graph is based on government health expenditure as a share of GDP. The metric captures how much a country invests in public healthcare relative to its economy. Countries with higher spending can better support aging populations by providing robust healthcare services. As you can see, China's healthcare government expenditure to GDP has also risen from 0.99% in 2000 to over 3% by 2019. Again, it is a reflection of China's aging population. Then, there's also the pension system. China's pension system is currently structured to support a vast number of retirees. Traditionally, older adults in China relied on family support, but rapid urbanization and smaller families have eroded that safety net. Instead, formal pension programs managed by local and central governments have grown in importance. Official data indicate that roughly 300 million Chinese citizens are over 60, and nearly 70% of them are eligible for some form of public pension. As more people retire, the required pension payouts will increase sharply, putting fiscal strain on government budgets. Although China has built multiple layers of pension schemes, urban employee pensions, rural resident pensions, etc., many experts worry about sustainability. Several reports out there have stated that the current system faces significant challenges due to the country's rapidly aging population and declining birth rates. The introduction of reforms, such as raising retirement ages, is a step forward, but it is far from enough to resolve the issue. China had recently increased the retirement age from 60 to 63 for men and 50 to 55 for women, for ordinary workers. But due to the demographic pressure, it may not be enough, as some have said. To top it off, the biggest problem that China would face from its aging population is how rising social and healthcare expenditures might affect national debt levels. Officially, China's general government debt as a share of GDP, as of the latest data available for 2023, published by the International Monetary Fund, shows 84.38%. That is no small figure, especially if we compare it to some other economies out there. Let's add the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Taiwan to this graph. As you can see, China has lower general government debt than the US and the UK, but their general government debt is more than Germany, and even much more than Taiwan. The difference here is the fact that China is still a developing economy. What that basically means is that China has fewer financial resources and less fiscal flexibility to manage rising expenditures compared to developed nations. But the problems go beyond expenditures. An older population can strain government budgets in two major ways. First, as the labor force shrinks and the pool of taxpayers diminishes, the government's tax revenue growth may slow. And the second is expenditures. As healthcare and pension spending rise, there will be more budgetary outlays. This imbalance, lower revenues but higher expenditures, can lead to budget deficits, forcing the government to borrow more to make up the difference. That increased borrowing may elevate China's national debt. Here's a graph on China's National General Public Budget for 2024, showing the revenues and expenditures. As you can see, the entire National General Budget is at a deficit already. In 2024, they are expected to generate only 24.49 trillion renminbi, but their expenditures are expected to be much more at 28.55 trillion renminbi. This is what we call a deficit, when the government spends more than they collect from revenues, and the problem that deficit brings is borrowings. China would need to borrow money, which can lead to an increase in debt. Here's another graph showing the growth in spending of select budget categories from 2013 to 2023. What this graph is about is the rapid increase in spending across key areas like healthcare, social security, and infrastructure. From 2013 to 2023, China's budget allocation for health and sanitation and social security and employment has seen significant growth. The overall change for health and sanitation is 170.5%, whereas social security and employment at 175.2%. Meanwhile, other important categories have seen slow growth, like transportation at just 30.6%. This is a reflection of the government's efforts to address the needs of its aging population. Now, these are just amongst the problems out there, and it is important to know that there are more. But we'll stop there. What we want to talk about next is what we've continuously mentioned throughout the video, and that's about China's economic status. China is still a developing economy. Its GDP may be the second largest out there, but when we compare China's GDP per capita to other economies, it is still far, far low. Why this is a problem is because a lower GDP per capita constrains a government's ability to fund social services, infrastructure, and healthcare at the same level of quality as wealthier nations. In developed economies, higher per capita income translates into larger tax revenues and deeper fiscal reserves that can cushion the impact of an aging population. In contrast, for a developing economy like China, even though its overall GDP is massive, that wealth spread across more than 1.4 billion people dilutes the per capita figure significantly. This, in turn, makes it harder to support programs for the elderly without cutting back on investments that spur economic growth, like education, research, and infrastructure improvements. Let's illustrate this with the tax revenue as a percentage of GDP graph, data that was published by the World Bank. As you can see, China's tax revenue as of the latest data available for 2022 is just 7.7%. What's even more concerning is that it continues to drop. That means the government is collecting a smaller share of its GDP as tax revenue, leaving less fiscal space to address rising social and healthcare costs. But it may not look bad, not until you compare it to other economies. Let's add the United States, Germany, and South Korea. As you can see, China's tax revenues are very low compared to these other economies. So, is China doing anything to fix these? Well, the short answer is yes, but not nearly enough, or at least not enough in the eyes of many economists. The Chinese government has implemented a range of measures aimed at addressing demographic challenges, from adjusting population control policies to revising retirement ages and ramping up investment in automation. However, the looming question is whether these interventions can effectively counteract the scale and speed of China's aging population. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.